Okay, picture the scene. It's early morning in Jerusalem. The sun is just starting to hit the limestone of the temple courts. It's quiet.
Right, it's cool, maybe a little dusty.
And Jesus is there teaching a crowd that's just hanging on his every word. It's this moment of, peace.
Until the doors burst open.
Right. And then suddenly that peace is just shattered.
Completely.
You have the religious elite, right? The
Yeah.
scribes and the
The
Pharisees
heavy hitters of Jerusalem.
dragging this woman into the middle of everyone. She's terrified, probably disheveled, and the accusation is just brutal.
She was caught in the act of adultery.
It is one of the most high-stakes openings in the entire New Testament, John chapter 8.
Oh, it's absolutely cinematic.
And usually when I hear this story, it's framed as this beautiful moment of kindness. He who is without sin cast the first stone.
Don't be judgmental. Be nice.
It's the ultimate gotcha to the hypocrites.
Which is true, but if you stop there, you miss the engine under the hood. Today, we're looking at a sermon called The Eternal Redemption by Pastor Paul C. Jong.
Okay.
And he argues that if you see this scene just as a lesson in being nice, you're missing a massive cosmic legal transaction that's taking
A
place.
transaction that supposedly covers everything, past, present, and future.
Exactly. This text uses the story of the adulterous woman not just as a story about mercy, but as a launching pad to explain a really specific theological mechanic involving water and the Spirit.
So the mission for this deep dive is to answer a huge question.
A question that haunts a lot of people. How can a human being, flawed and messy, be considered completely sinless in the eyes of a holy God?
And the answer the source gives is, well, it's distinct.
It's very distinct. It involves goats, a river, and a very specific definition of the word righteousness. It certainly challenges the way most modern believers think about how forgiveness actually works.
Let's get into it, because before we get to the solution, we have to understand the trap. The Pharisees didn't just stumble upon this woman, right?
Oh, not at all. This was a cold-blooded setup. I mean, they were using a human life as bait.
Just awful.
And look at the question they ask him. Teacher, this woman was caught in the act of adultery. In the law, Moses commanded us to stone such women. Now, what do you say?
It feels like a simple question, but it's a loaded gun.
It's a classic double bind. If Jesus says, no, let her go, well, he's publicly defying the law of Moses.
He's a heretic, ministry over, right there.
Right. But if he says, yes, stone her.
Then he walks right into a Roman trap.
Exactly. Remember, the Jews were under Roman occupation. Rome had stripped them of the right to capital punishment.
So if he orders a stoning, he's inciting rebellion. Plus, he totally contradicts his own message of mercy.
It's a lose-lose.
Or so they thought. But before we get to how Jesus flips the script, the source material stops us. It asks us to look at the charge itself, adultery.
Yeah, Pastor Jong asks, who is actually the adulterer here?
And this is where the source holds up a mirror.
It does. The argument is that the indictment isn't local, it's universal. The text asserts that everyone standing in that circle, and arguably everyone listening right now, is an adulterer.
Okay, hold on. That's a bold claim. I mean, statistically, sure, infidelity happens, but everyone, I know plenty of people who are fiercely loyal, that seems like a stretch.
You have to look at the definition the source is using. Jong argues that adultery isn't just physical. He breaks it down into 3 categories.
Okay.
You have the physical act, yes.
Yeah.
But then you have mental adultery lust, fantasizing, the stuff that happens in your own head.
Which brings to mind the Sermon on the Mount. If you look with lust.
You've already committed it.
Precisely.
But then he goes a layer deeper. Spiritual adultery.
Spiritual adultery.
The source argues that humans were created to be the bride of the Creator. So anytime you love something else, money, success, comfort, even family more than the Creator, you're cheating.
You're committing spiritual adultery.
Yes.
So under that definition, a perfect person who never breaks a civil law but loves their career more than God
is an adulterer. The text says our lives are filled with innumerable acts of adultery that we often don't even recognize until we're faced with death.
Wow, that changes the dynamic of the scene entirely.
It does.
It means the Pharisees aren't judges standing over a criminal.
They're criminals standing over another criminal. Jung calls them thieves with formal permits. They're wearing the robes, they have the titles, but internally, they're a bundle of sin.
They're just better at hiding it.
Exactly. They were hushing up their own conscience, but deep down, they knew.
And that leads to that moment that's always so mysterious. Jesus ignores them. He bends down and starts writing on the ground with his finger. What is he doing?
That is the million-dollar question. Scholars had debated this for centuries, but our source takes a very specific angle by connecting it to a prophecy in Jeremiah.
Okay, Jeremiah 17.1. Remind me.
The verse says, "The sin of Judah is written with a pen of iron. With the point of a diamond, it is engraved on the tablet of their heart."
The tablet of their heart. That's a vivid image.
It is. The source posits that sins are recorded in two distinct places. First, on that tablet of the heart. That's your conscience, that nagging voice that knows what you did.
So when Jesus is writing on the ground, the idea is he's mirroring what's written inside them.
That's the interpretation here. He's showing them that he knows. He is triggering that internal record, and that's why they felt convicted.
They saw their own internal file being pulled, but you said there are two places.
Right. And this is crucial for the rest of the argument. The source points to Revelation 20.12, which talks about the book of works, or the book of deeds, kept before God.
So it's double jeopardy. It's written in your head, so you know you're guilty. And it's written in God's book, so he knows you're guilty.
Exactly. And the source argues that as long as that record exists in the book of works, you are headed for judgment, no matter how nice you are.
This creates a massive tension. The Pharisees leave, oldest to youngest.
Right, because the tablet of the heart convicted them.
Which leaves Jesus alone with the woman. And this is the pivot point. He asks, "Has no one condemned you?" She says, "No one, sir." And he says,
"Neither do I condemn you."
Now, my first reaction is, see? He's just forgiving her. It's pure, unconditional love. He waves his hand. The sin is gone.
And the source would say, that's a beautiful sentiment, but it's legally impossible.
What impossible? He's God. Can't he just do what he wants?
Not if he wants to remain just. The source argues God can't just wave his hand and say it's okay to sin.
Okay.
Think about it. If a human judge let a murderer go just because the judge felt loving, we wouldn't call him good. We'd call him corrupt.
We'd say justice wasn't served.
Right. Justice requires payment. The Bible is clear. The wages of sin is death. If Jesus just forgave her without a legal basis, he would be unjust.
So how can he say, "Neither do I condemn you"? Is he bluffing?
No. Zhang argues this statement wasn't an emotional release. It was a legal ruling based on a transaction that had already occurred.
Already occurred. But the cross hasn't happened yet.
No, but something else had happened. And this is where we have to go back to the shadows of the Old Testament to understand the reality of the New. We have to look at the Day of Atonement.
Okay, Leviticus 16. We're going way back. This is the scapegoat stuff.
The scapegoat. This is a mechanism God set up. It's very specific, almost like a hazardous waste disposal protocol. You have a high priest, a live goat, and a ritual.
Right, and they kill the goat.
Eventually. But before the goat dies, there is a step the source says most Christians completely overlook. Leviticus 16.21. The high priest had to lay both hands on the head of the live goat.
Laying on of hands, I mean, we see that in church today. It's a blessing, right?
In our modern context, yes.
Mm-hmm.
But the source insists that in the Old Testament law, laying on of hands meant transfer. It was a conduit.
Like a file transfer, cut and paste.
That's a great analogy. When Aaron laid his hands on that goat and confessed the sins of Israel, he was legally moving the sins from the people onto the animal.
So the goat becomes the carrier. It's not guilty, but it's holding the liability.
Correct. And because it holds the liability, it must die
Brr.
or be banished.
Hmm.
The key concept here is that atonement required three things. 1, a priest. 2, a laying on of hands to transfer the sin. 3, a death to pay the price.
And if you miss step 2, the transfer killing the goat doesn't do anything.
Exactly. Without the transfer, the death is meaningless.
Okay, I follow the Old Testament logic, but we're talking about Jesus and this woman. How does a goat in the wilderness help her?
Because the source argues Jesus is the fulfillment of that shadow. If the Old Testament had a high priest and a goat, the New Testament must have a high priest and a lamb.
Jesus is the lamb. Behold the Lamb of God. That's standard.
Yes. But here is the piece that the source claims is the missing link for most people. If Jesus is the lamb, who is the high priest?
Mm-hmm.
Who laid hands on him?
I guess I always assumed God the Father. Or maybe Jesus just took it on willingly.
That's the common assumption. But John points to a specific human being. He points to John the Baptist.
John the Baptist. The wild man in the desert. He's a prophet, sure, but a high priest.
It feels like a stretch until you look at his DNA. The source builds a really interesting lineage argument. Who was John's father?
Zechariah, right.
Yes. And who was Zechariah? Luke chapter 1 tells us he was a priest of the division of Abijah. He was serving in the temple when the angel Gabriel appeared.
So he was an Aaronic priest.
Which means John the Baptist was born into the priesthood. By blood, he was a direct descendant of Aaron. The source argues he was the last high priest of the Old Testament era, the representative of all mankind.
Wow. Okay, so fast forward to the Jordan River. Jesus comes to be baptized.
Right. And John tries to stop him. He says, I need to be baptized by you.
And what's Jesus's reply?
Matthew 3:15. He says, permitted to be so now, for thus it is fitting for us to fulfill all righteousness.
Fulfill all righteousness. I always thought that just meant let's do the right thing or set a good example.
But the source argues all righteousness is a legal term. It means completing the requirements of the law. Pastor John posits that this moment, the baptism, was the laying on of hands.
Whoa, okay. So when John puts his hands on Jesus to submerge him,
It wasn't just a ceremony. It was the actual spiritual forensic transaction. Just as Aaron laid hands on the goat, John, the last high priest, laid hands on Jesus. And in that moment, the sins of the world were transferred.
that is incredibly mechanical.
It is. The source says all sins, past, present, and future, were moved onto Jesus right then. That is why the very next day, John points at Jesus and says, behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world.
He could say that because he knew he had just put the sin there himself.
Precisely. And the source even points to Jesus' age to back this up.
What about his age?
He waited until he was 30. He lived in obscurity until then. Why? Because the book of Numbers specified that a high priest must be 30 years old to enter full service.
He was waiting for the legal age.
Exactly. Nothing was accidental. It was all about adhering to the strict requirements.
Okay, let's tie this back to the woman. She's on the ground, guilty. Jesus looks at her. If we follow this logic, the reason he can say, neither do I condemn you, is because...
It's because, in his mind, he has already taken her adultery onto himself at the Jordan River.
he wasn't ignoring her sin, he was carrying it.
He knew he was effectively the scapegoat, loaded with her sin, the Pharisees' hypocrisy, and the sins of the very people who had screamed for his death.
But wait, I have to push back here. If the sin was taken at the baptism, why the cross? If the transfer happened at the river, why did he have to die?
Because transfer isn't payment. Remember the 3 steps: priest, transfer, death. The goat receives the sin, but then the goat must die.
The payment.
The justice of God demands execution. The wages of sin is death.
So because Jesus was carrying the sin after the baptism, he became the target.
He had to be punished. The source argues the cross was the execution of the sentence that was passed at the Jordan.
So the agony in Gethsemane, the sweating blood,
He wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of the wrath of God that was coming for our sin.
this brings up a legal concept the source calls no double jeopardy.
This is the payoff. In a court of law, you can't be tried twice for the same crime. If you serve your time, the law can't come back 10 years later and arrest you again.
So if Jesus took the sin and Jesus paid the death penalty,
Then the debt is gone. The source argues that because God judged Jesus on the cross, he cannot legally judge the believer. It would be double jeopardy.
that's why he says it is finished. He means the whole cycle.
Yes. And this leads to eternal redemption. The source is very strong on this point. A believer does not need to ask for forgiveness every single day to be saved.
Okay, stop there. That is a huge shift. I grew up thinking that if I messed up, I had to confess it immediately or I was out of fellowship. The daily, I messed up, please forgive me, cycle.
The source actually compares that daily cycle to the Old Testament priests who offered sacrifices year after year because the blood of bulls and goats couldn't permanently take away sin.
So if you're asking for forgiveness daily to maintain your salvation,
You're acting like the work wasn't finished. You're acting like the transfer didn't really happen.
but isn't that dangerous? I can hear the critics. If I'm forgiven for my future sins, why not just go out and sin?
That's the classic objection. Shall we sin that grace may abound? But the source flips the motivation. It describes a radical shift in identity. It proposes a believer should view themselves as sinless.
Sinless, that's a heavy word. Even if I lose my temper in traffic.
Even then, the source distinguishes between committing a sinful action, which we all do, and having the status of a sinner.
It's the difference between getting a muddy footprint on your shoe and being a mud person.
That's a good way to put it. Or, going back to the records, the tablet of the heart might say guilty. Your conscience will scream at you. But the book of works in heaven.
It's empty. The record was moved.
Exactly. So true faith, according to this text, is choosing to believe what's in the book of works over what's screaming on the tablet of the heart.
And the license to sin question.
The source uses a vivid analogy. It talks about people who look like princes on the outside, but are like a filthy dump on the inside because of their guilt.
The prince on the outside, dump on the inside. I think we all know that feeling.
Groomed, successful, smiling, but terrified of being found out, terrified of judgment. The source argues that true holiness doesn't come from fear. It comes from the boldness of a lion.
Bold like a lion.
When you know the debt is paid, really paid, past, present, and future, you aren't trying not to sin so God won't hit you. You're living in gratitude because the problem was solved 2,000 years ago.
You aren't working for salvation. You're working from salvation.
Precisely. The source says, it is not up to the endeavors of an individual. It is because of the salvation of Jesus.
It really reframes that moment with the woman when he said, go and sin no more. It wasn't a threat.
It was a possibility. She was free to live differently because she wasn't carrying the weight anymore.
So let's recap this mechanism because there are a lot of moving parts.
Right. If we boil it down, it's a three-step process. Step one is the law. Its purpose isn't to make us good, but to act as a mirror to show us we're hopeless sinners.
Step two.
Step two is the water of the baptism, the transfer point where the high priest lays hands on the lamb and moves the sin.
And step three is the blood.
The cross, the judgment and payment for that transferred sin.
Water and spirit. You need both.
You need both. If you only have the cross, you have payment, but no transfer. If you only have the baptism, you have transfer, but no payment. You need both for the complete eternal redemption.
And the final takeaway is a definition of faith. It's not about trying harder.
No. It says faith is accepting the testimony. It's looking at the baptism and the cross and saying, I believe that took away my sin. It's a shift from asking God to do something to thanking God that he has already done it.
It challenges you to really audit your own beliefs. Do you believe your sin is on you or on him?
And if you believe it's on him, why are you still carrying the guilt?
That's the question to chew on. Here is a thought to leave you with, something the source hints at with the Book of Life. Ask yourself, how does changing your view of when your sin was forgiven at the start of your faith versus asking for it every morning change how you wake up tomorrow?
Does it make you lazy or does it make you bold?
Thanks for diving deep with us today.
See you next time.